Welcome to Mysteries to Die For, and this toe tag. I am TG Wolff, and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. This is normally a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. Today is a bonus episode that we call a toe tag. It's the first chapter from a fresh release in the mystery, crime, or thriller genre. Today's featured release is Early Termination by Cindy Goyette. All right, let's jump right into this one. 1. In probation work, there's no such thing as a routine day at the office. This morning, flashing red and blue lights guided me to the crime scene. Pulling up behind the coroner's van, I parked my Jeep Wrangler and took a deep breath. Coroner meant someone was dead. Not a good start to my day, but even worse for whoever I'd been called here about. As I climbed out of my Jeep, I adjusted my sunglasses and surveyed the area. Yellow crime scene tape blocked off the entrance to the canal. Red tile rooftops peeked over 6-foot walls that separated the waterway from the middle-class sea of stucco on either side. The canal, about 10 feet wide, snaked smack in the middle of a dirt pathway that residents used to get their steps in. September was drawing to a close, and I appreciated the sign of cooler weather that would drop below 100 degrees for the first time in months. 90 degrees might seem hot to some, but in Arizona, it was sweater weather. I walked up to a uniformed cop and held up my badge. I'm with probation. Detective Ramsey asked me to come. Police reaching out to us wasn't unusual, but a crime scene call wasn't routine. My curiosity mixed with dread. The cop glanced at my identification. Miss Carson, welcome to the shit show. Don't touch anything. He held the tape high so I could pass. I ducked underneath and secured my badge to my belt so the other officers could tell I belonged there. Lots of Tempe police blue uniforms, forensic staff mulled around the area, but I homed in on a tall, balding man standing close to the water. He had on plainclothes, khakis and a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I figured he might be Ramsey, so I walked over to him. He scribbled something on a small notepad and glanced at me as I approached. You the P.O.? I nodded and dropped my gaze to the mound covered by a tarp at his feet. Wasn't fond of seeing dead bodies. I was a P.O., not a cop, for a reason. Thinking this might be one of your charges, Miss Carson, he said. I gotta warn you, it's not pretty. He was in the water for a while, and birds and God knows what else got to him. You got a strong stomach? No. The mere thought of seeing a body, my breakfast threatened to make a reappearance, but I couldn't admit that. I'm fine. What do you think? Why do you think he was on my caseload? Ramsey shrugged. Someone stuffed your business card in his mouth. I gulped air. You're kidding. Nope. You ready? Ramsey reached down and pulled the sheet back before I could respond. A bloated green face, missing chunks of cheek, greeted me. Bulging eyes looked skyward. Bran flakes swirled in my stomach and crested in my throat. Without a word, I ran to the canal and vomited so hard I thought I'd hack up a vital organ or two. You okay, ma'am? Ramsey sounded bored. I wiped my mouth on my sleeve and I straightened. Memories of the same man, alive and animated, flashed in my mind. Not so long ago, he'd been proud of accomplishing a solid month of sobriety. Now, I hardly recognized him. Could you put the sheet back? I said, keeping my back to the body on the ground. Sure. I waited a moment to give Ramsey time to cover the corpse and for me to compose myself. Well, that would take a while, and the detective did not seem like he had a lot of patience. The relationship between police and probation was fickle. We often needed each other, but POs were on the lower end of the food chain. When I finally turned around, Ramsey tapped his pen against his notebook. So, you know the guy or what? Brian Johnson, I said. He was on abscond status. Haven't seen him for a few weeks, maybe a month. He was doing well, and then he stopped reporting. He probably relapsed. I was gearing up to request a warrant for probation violations. What do you think was the cause of death? Ramsey shrugged again. Too soon to tell, but most people who die of natural causes don't end up in a canal or send a message like your business card does. They preserved it in a plastic baggie so we'd get the point no matter how long it took to find him. I felt even sicker. Could the message have been for me? Couldn't you ID him through the fingerprints? I thought you had all kinds of tech gadgets for that. Sure, Ramsey said, but then I wouldn't have seen your reaction. Plus, some of his fingertips are missing, and what's left probably isn't usable. Dental records take time. He pulled a business card out of his shirt pocket and handed it to me. Call me if you think of anything else. I might need to know. I turned back to the canal and I vomited until I had nothing left to give. What do you think? Should we go for chapter 2? Let's go for chapter 2. Chapter 2. Back in the solace of my Jeep, I clutched Ramsey's business card and tried to bring my breathing back to pre-heart attack level. Eyes shut, I hoped for Zen, but Brian Johnson's ballooned face floated before me. Jerking my eyes open, I shook my head to clear the image. Brian was an okay guy. Like most of my charges, he had a drug problem. When he was high, he made poor choices, like stealing cars, which was why he was on probation. When he was sober, he had a sharp wit and a kind heart. Last time I saw him, he even made a large payment toward the restitution he owed. Relapses weren't uncommon, and I figured that was the reason he stopped reporting. But he'd been in the canal, not out terrorizing the community. I felt guilty for thinking the worst of him, even if it was an occupational hazard. Why was my business card stuffed in his mouth? Had to be a message to me. But what was the message? I gave my card out all the time. Everyone I supervised got one. I also left them on doors when I did field work and no one was home. Family members often got them, as did attorneys, treatment providers, and other community partners. Support staff at the office also handed them out if anyone asked for me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Tony Romero, the new officer I was training. Thought you were meeting me at the office at 9. I'm ready to go. I rubbed my forehead. Normally, watching Tony fumble his way through probationary period was a good distraction. The job wasn't for everyone, and I was coming to realize it probably wasn't a good fit for him. Because his dad was the manager of the community service unit, Tony's shortcomings were often overlooked. I was given the task of shaping him into a decent PO or finding an infraction strong enough to justify letting him go. I started my Jeep and sent Tony a text message saying I was on my way. I tried to concentrate on the day ahead of me, but all I could think about was my newly deceased probationer and what his death had to do with me. The probation office sat across from Central High School in downtown Phoenix, which didn't quite cover the 1,000 feet sex offenders needed to keep between them and any schools. But buildings were expensive, and the department couldn't always be picky. I had a cubicle on the second floor with the rest of my unit. Entertainment was abundant as we watched the goings-on at the campus below us. Though I'd been out of high school for years, I could spot the mean girls from 50 feet away. Most of what I saw made me feel old, even though my 31st birthday was still a few months off. Once I arrived, I stopped by my supervisor's office to fill her in on my trip to the canal that morning. The dry erase board hanging outside her office said Alma wouldn't be in until afternoon. Brian Johnson wouldn't get any more dead. I could wait to chat with her then. Back at the desk, I found Tony sitting in my chair, yucking it up with Claire, who had the cubicle across from mine. Eyeing Tony's boots perched on the edge of my desk, I raised an eyebrow. Make yourself at home? I dropped my messenger bag on the floor next to a stack of files. Tony lowered his feet to the floor. Let me finish the field list. He stood and scurried back to his cubicle, several spots back. I'd talked to him about working instead of socializing before, but I obviously had to revisit the subject. I wasn't trying to be a killjoy, but he was behind in his work and he needed to learn about priorities. Lillian Harrison's been reaching out to you, Claire said. She sounds upset. What else is new? Lillian was the 80-year-old mother of my least favorite client, Eric Harrison. She called me at least several times a week, usually hysterical and claiming Eric was running amok. She was a sweet old lady, but the problem was that whenever I went to the house to see what was going on, which was often, she didn't remember that she called and sometimes even accused me of harassing her son. I faulted dementia, but I couldn't ignore her calls in case there really was a problem. I played my messages, and sure enough, 6 of them were from Lillian. "Eric's gonna kill me," she said, wailing into the phone. "You've got to do something." I tried to call her back. If she really was in danger, which I doubted, she should call the police, not me. But I got her voicemail. After deleting the last message, I looked up to see Tony staring down at me. I mapped out our day. He held out a list of directions from an internet map site, which gave us the most succinct route to take. "We need to swing by Eric Harrison's first," I said. Tony let out a giant sigh. "He's not on the list. Do I have to do a new map?" "No, we'll just adjust," I said. "Not a big deal." I fought to keep the annoyance from my voice. Being flexible was a huge part of the job. Plans were often upended when a client's crisis popped up unexpectedly. I couldn't fathom why Alma thought I'd be a good trainer. I had the patience of a puppy dog without the happy-go-lucky attitude, and I wasn't exactly known for my coaching skills. I wondered if I was supposed to benefit from the experience as much as Tony, or if it was Alma's idea of a joke. I swung my gear bag over my shoulder. Inside was my baton, a bulletproof vest, and any paperwork we might need. My pepper spray and handcuffs were clapped to my belt. Some POs carry firearms. I wasn't one of them. Guns had a way of falling into the wrong hands. And since one was used to end my mother's life, I had an even stronger aversion to them. Most days, I tried not to think about that. "Let's go," I said, and I headed toward the door with Tony in tow. Lillian and her son lived in a ranch-style house in an older section of West Phoenix. It desperately needed a remodel and probably hadn't had a good cleaning since I was in diapers. Lillian kept the heavy curtains on all the windows shut. Since most of the light bulbs were burnt out, I always kept a flashlight in hand even if it was mid-afternoon. Eric said he lived with his mom to help around the house, and even got paid by the state to be her caregiver. Well, the joke was on the state. The place had fallen into even worse disrepair in the 6 months I'd supervised him. Tony and I made our way to the front door after he called in our location on the radio. "Stand to the right side of the door so they can't see you until they opened it," I instructed as he knocked. He opened his mouth to say something, but the look I lasered his way seemed to make him think otherwise. He adjusted his stance and sighed. Lillian answered. Her wrinkled face was tear-streaked. "Casey," she whispered, "he's lost his mind. He wants me dead so he can have the house." She leaned forward. "I took him off my life insurance policy, but he doesn't know it." Her secret was safe with me. I wasn't about to stir the drama pot. "Can we come in?" She stepped aside and we entered. I clicked my flashlight on and shone it around the living room. "He home?" "In the kitchen." I waited a beat. "Anyone else here?" She shook her head no. Normally I would have asked more questions, but Lillian wasn't exactly a reliable source of information. I hoped Tony would jump in and show me any PO abilities he'd kept hidden so far, but he remained silent. I walked into the kitchen with Tony and Lillian behind me. Eric stood at the sink with his back to us. He was a pretty big guy, not in a muscular way. His physique attested to time he spent on the couch, probably with donuts. He tipped his head back as he sucked something down from a brown bottle. When he placed it on the counter, I noted it was a 40. Several more empties littered the counter as well. I looked at Tony and made a cuffing motion with my hands against my wrist so he'd know my intention. A blank look settled on Tony's face. Cripes! I'd have more luck asking Lillian for help. "Eric," I said, "please turn around." Eric's shoulders tightened, and he cracked his neck before slowly turning to face us. Bloodshot eyes watered. His face was flushed and sweat glistened on his brow. The odor of alcohol radiated off of him. Eric was drunk. I knew from his history that he was a mean drunk. Because of this, he wasn't allowed to drink. Eric needed to go to jail. Our agency didn't allow us to make arrests without police assistance unless there were immediate safety concerns. which meant we needed to manage a call to dispatch so they could send an officer, and we needed to do so without putting Eric on alert. A collection of scary knives plugged to a magnet on the wall behind him. That and the rookie PO at my side turned my oh shit radar up a notch. I motioned toward the door. "Let's talk in the other room." "What the fuck?" Eric said. But he complied and walked past me and Tony into the poorly lit dining room where his mother met us, wringing her hands. I wanted to call for backup, but since Tony was clueless about my plan, I searched my brain for a way to make the call without Eric getting wise. Eric saved me the trouble. "I'm going to jail, aren't I?" His words came out slurred. "I'm exploring our options," I said, hoping to keep him from freaking out. I looked at Tony and made the gesture toward the radio. "Call it in." Eric took a step toward his mom. "Can I at least hug my mom goodbye?" I was losing control of the situation and kept my eye on the exit in case we had to run. Tony had his thumb on the radio mic but looked confused about what to say. Eric stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his mom. He whispered something in her ear and she reached for the waistband of his jeans. She moved his shirt out of the way, revealing the handle of a gun. Her gnarled fingers wrapped around the grip. I sprang into action, but before I could reach them, she pulled the gun out and passed it to her son. "Shit! Gun!" Lurching forward, I shoved Lillian out of the way, then tackled Eric, taking him to the ground before he could raise the weapon. As we fell, Tony jumped on top of us. Not helpful. Fumbling for control of the gun, I snatched it out of Eric's hand and held it above my head. "Get his hands," I said to Tony, my voice cracking. Tony pinned Eric to the ground as I rolled out of the way and pushed the handgun under a hutch. With that out of reach, I fumbled for my cuffs while Tony struggled to control the flailing Eric. Eric elbow clipped me under my chin before I was able to grab his arm and hold it to the floor with my knee. Cuffing one wrist, I reached for the other just as Tony got a hold of it. Handcuffs in place, I sat back on my haunches and caught my breath. Eric squirmed beneath Tony's weight, cussing, but we restrained him and he was no longer a threat. Tony straddled him and rode him like a bucking bull until Eric ran out of steam. Panting, I rubbed my aching jaw. Then, still slightly out of breath, I keyed the radio and requested backup. In the dim light, it took me a minute to locate Lillian, lying on the floor beside the dining room table. She squinted at me, sweetness draining from her face like something flushed down the toilet, replaced by an evil I'd only seen in horror films. "You broke my goddamn hip," she said, spittle coming out of her mouth. "You're gonna pay, you bitch." All right, so that is the first and second chapter of Early Termination by Cindy Goyette. So Early Termination is a crime novel. Parole Officer Casey Carson has her hands full with the stacked caseload and a rookie to train. Her workload takes a twist when one of her clients is found dead with her business card stuffed in his mouth. Now the cops want her, members of the Diablo gang want her ex-husband and her new plaything, well, they both want her too. Bottom line, Early Termination is for you if you like fast-paced crime stories woven with suspense, thrills, and humor. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that first two chapters. You definitely get a taste for the suspense, the thrills, and the humor that are laced throughout this book. So here's my review. The standout feature of this read is the intrigue. Casey is our hero, yes, but in some respects, she's also the victim. Her professional world is devolving around her. First, she has to realize she's caught up in the middle of something big and nasty, and then she has to decide what to do about it. Casey is a great every woman kind of hero. She isn't a hotshot spy or a badass detective. She's a parole officer, and she just wants to stay in her lane. She's happy there. Or she was. Her everydayness is the key to her appeal, at least it was for me. The supporting characters here provide color and some comic relief to Casey's straight woman personality. Her new love interest, Marcus, calls her Sunshine, a tongue-in-cheek nickname since she isn't known for brightening people's day. She calls him his hotness, but, not to his face. Her cousin Joy is temporarily living with her. Self-reportedly psychic and now dating one of Casey's co-workers, Joy is an entertaining pain in Casey's butt. And there is her ex, Bets, who is the by-the-book cop And then there's felony. The Cocker Spaniel Bets drops on her lap. Early Termination twists the main plot, which is who's killing Casey's clients and why, with the professional and personal side stories. Some people may find it a little much, but really I think most people will enjoy the resulting pace and dynamic storytelling. There is not a spot in this book that lags or sags or where I can say I got bored. It just goes. Standing at the end of the book and looking back, I was able to retrace most of the threads through this braid. I had a question or two, but as you all know by now, that's pretty normal for me. Early Termination crosses over several crime genres, giving it a pretty broad appeal. It's listed as an organized crime/thriller on Amazon and as a mystery suspense on Partners in Crime website. Suspense is absolutely a major element, as I said, as Casey works to figure out what is going on right along with us. There are thriller elements as Casey is threatened by a gang that is lurking from book 1 and takes actions to fight back. And while murder is central to the story, I mean, that's what's getting us going here, the mystery element is pretty light as Casey isn't starring as the role of the investigator. For the most part, she leaves the investigating, what happened to Brian, up to the police. So that leaves Early Termination squarely in the crime, suspense, thriller cross-genre. The humor in Early Termination is a cherry on a sundae here, with witty lines like, "I had the patience of a puppy without the happy-go-lucky attitude." You heard that one in chapter 2. And referring to the mess her new furry friend made, Casey tells him, "You should be embarrassed," but then admits no one had ever been that happy to see her. There were several places throughout the book where I just really had good chuckles. This was a fast read that earned points for laughter, the zany family and the cute dog. This is the second book in the series, and I did not read the first. The primary storyline stood alone from the first book, but several of the subplots did carry over. Goyette gives us the background needed to jump in, but I think I personally would have appreciated the characters and plots more if I had read the first. So as far as recommending to you all, I would put reading the first book in a nice to do category. You absolutely can read this without it, but again, I think you might get a deeper enjoyment from it if you have that familiarity first. The title of book 1 is Obey All Laws. So Early Termination was released from Level Best Books and is promoted by Partners in Crime. There's a link in the show notes to the Amazon link. So let me introduce you to our author, Cindy Goyette. She is a former probation officer who had a front row seat to the criminal justice system. She kept her sanity by finding humor in most situations. A mix of these things helped her create... Hold on, I just lost my spot. A mix of these things helped her create the Probation Case Files mystery series. After spending over 20 years in Arizona, Cindy lives in Washington State with her husband and 2 Cocker Spaniels. A link to Cindy's website is in the show notes. With that, I will remind you that Partners in Crime Book Tours represents a network of 300 plus bloggers offering tailor-made virtual book tours and marketing options for crime, mystery, and thriller writers from around the world. Founded in 2011, PICT offers virtual book tours for well-established and best-selling authors, as well as those just starting out their careers. PICT prides itself on tailored packages for authors with a personal touch from the tour coordinators. For more information, check out their website, partnersincrimetours.com. So join us next week for Season 8, Anything But Murder, where our jewel heist is our murderless crime. It's The Last Diamond by Kathleen Marple Kalb. All right, Jack, take us out.